that as a former Brooklyn Tech alum, I would be remiss if I didn't participate in this very important dialogue. We've had this conversation a couple of times. And, sorry, can you hear me a little better now?
Yeah.
I use Verizon. So we've had this conversation a few times. And one of the questions that I've had is New York City has 8 specialized high schools, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And 3 of them are the subject of state action. But 5 of those particular schools are within the city's jurisdiction, correct?
That's correct.
And it was also recently reported that one of those schools, which is located in Staten Island, what's the name of that school? I don't have
Staten Island Tech.
has a more segregated population than pretty much any other school, which is a specialized high school. Do you remember reading that report?
I have looked at the data. I just want to, before we that's a great interruption. Just before we move on, I just want to say very, very quickly that, just in the premise of your question, the law actually calls out those 3 plus any named by the chancellor. And so we believe that the newest 5, are involved in the state legislation. So I just want to say it's a bit complicated. Just to add to the question. Is it
possible then to change the regulations with respect to admission of those 5 schools without any state action?
We don't think it is. We think that
yes or no? Is it possible to change the admission policies on those non-state sponsored chartered schools without state intervention?
The direct answer is no. I'd be happy to elaborate on that for you. So because the same process exists for the admission of students to those schools, because they are also considered to be specialized school environments, because there is now a history of using the same process for those specialized schools, they are a portfolio of schools that we feel, and the law is unclear, are all part of the same approach to specialized schools.
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Chancellor, in the past, I believe that there was a different answer that you gave with respect to this question, which I'm about to ask now. Since there are 5 schools that are not the subject matter of the Brooklyn Tech, Stuyvesant, and Bronx Science, that I will purport that you can change the admission policy now to remove the test if you so choose to. Why don't you remove the test from those schools to show as a best practices, if you will, that by removing the test, it will in effect increase diversity and access to communities of color all across our spectrum to those particular schools?
So thank you for the question.
Excuse me, please. The question has been asked.
Assemblyman Walker, so thank you for that question. So 3 things that I'd like to say. Number 1, the 3 schools that are covered under the Hecht-Calandra law comprise 80% of the students in the specialized schools. So while there may be 8 specialized schools, 80% of the students are covered in that law under those 3 schools. So number 2 is we're not interested in making an imperfect law a little less imperfect. The issue is why do we have, with all due respect to the Assembly, and I've mentioned this in my testimony, I've lived and worked in 5 states in 5 major school systems. I have never seen a state law come to local control in this way to designate an admissions process to 3 or 4 or 8 schools. So the issue is the law that doesn't allow us then to take these schools as a collective. The third thing that I would say is that as the 80% of students existing in these 3 schools, the fact that historically, since the creation of the 5 schools, They've been treated the same as the other schools. And the work that I've done to have conversations with the leaders of these schools and various communities in the schools see themselves as a portfolio of schools. They are the specialized schools in New York City. So to start to then create even more segregation in those schools with different processes, again, we see this as something that is one portfolio of schools.
Right, I understand how you see it, but I think the point is well taken, that you have jurisdiction. You can take action right now if you so choose to, and I implore you to exercise that in a statement of good faith, that the city is actually serious about doing what it says that it's going to do. In addition to that, so I'm from District 23, Ocean Hill, Brownsville. Probably one of the most underperforming school districts, I believe, in our city. Yet I went to Brooklyn Tech, my chief of staff went to Brooklyn Tech, and there are a whole host of tech nights that, I'm surrounded by, and we're proud of that. And for the most part, we understand that by the time that we got to tech, we realized that the exam did not test 1 + 1. But what it tested was our ability to think, to be able to perform once we got to Brooklyn Tech, because math, I'm not soliciting
Excuse me, ladies and
any
gentlemen, this
applause.
is not going to be a cheering match.
Thank you. So math wasn't math, it was physics, it was philosophy. So I believe that by saying that we no longer, and if, in fact, when I took the LSAT didn't test whether or not I knew the law, but it tested whether or not I could think in order to perform in law school. And that's what I believe that this test actually takes a look at. But there were programs within our district schools that helped us to prepare for those. Do we have any gifted and talented programs in schools in communities like District 23? Do we have a gifted and talented program?
Well, I would just add, I think this was an example that came up earlier that I think is important just to, we attempted to target some special preparation and school day administration of specialized high schools in schools that were like IS 392 in Brownsville, that are screened schools for high achieving students. And so we offered there both free preparation for the exam and a chance to take the test during the school day. But what we saw there is that out of 96 eighth graders at the school, and 90 sat for the test, fewer than 5 received offers. And so the question becomes, what is it about the system that's producing those results? Because I think, as Deputy Chancellor Robinson highlighted at the beginning of the hearing, we have citywide 2,200 Black and Latino eighth graders that had average state test scores of 4.0 or above. They're incredibly talented, accomplished students, but only 18% of the Black testers and 23% of Latino testers received an offer. And so I think, by and large, while we may be seeing, in any system, there are results either way, but by and large, the trend is that we have these really high-performing students that are not getting the opportunity to attend specialized high schools, even when we go to extra efforts and invest resources in helping them prepare for the test and take the test, even at screened schools. As you're saying, at schools that are identified for high performers. So we're doing everything we can, but I think what we've come to in the end is the conclusion that the system itself is broken and needs reform.
I agree with you that the system is broken and needs to be reformed. But we were on a pretty decent track until many of the middle schools within our communities were dissolved, and we started to see more K-8 schools, because there were certain schools within our communities which were feeder schools to Brooklyn Tech. For instance, Philippa Schuyler and a number of other schools that existed, which we don't have the benefit of anymore. In fact, there are schools that are feeder schools to Brooklyn Tech. Mark Twain, for example, which also has another level of diversity issues, even at the middle school level. So what can we do at the middle school level? And will you, help me to understand if we had better performing, superior performing investments in our middle schools, that we can produce the type of student that existed in 1993 when I went, and I had a principal that invested in me and a school system that invested in me so that I could thrive at Brooklyn Tech. Can we get stronger middle schools?
And this will be to close, because I know the Chancellor has appointments. Please.
Yes, so Assemblymember Walker, so as we've discussed as well, that is exactly what we're attempting to do. Most recently, we announced the Bronx Plan, which is really the comprehensive school plan, which is doing exactly what you talked about, having communities empowered to take on problems of practice and then propose solutions, and there's a funding mechanism for being able to do that. Even in the conversation around gifted and talented, we've learned a lot in the last 5 years, not to mention last 20 years, about brain science and how children learn. And quite frankly, even when we look at gifted and talented programs across the city, they're segregated as well. So this notion that you test kids into specialized programs, whether you call them gifted or talented programs or you call them specialized schools, the evidence is very clear that it's not representative of who our students are. And while you are, I really respect your story and where you come from, and I do have tremendous respect for what you've shared. The fact of the matter is that there are many more students that look like you and me that because of this single test don't have the opportunity to be able to go to a specialized school if that's what they want. And the other thing that I would say is that as I look at the evidence around why is it that they're not going, we are absolutely investing in enriched programs. We're investing in STEAM programs, not STEM, STEAM, where you add the arts into the course of study. We're looking at IB programs, and we're actually funding planning processes for schools, not only in Brownsville, but other schools in other communities that have historically been underserved. So we are absolutely moving in that direction. The imperative, though, is we can't wait for the implementation of lots of programs where we know that based on our proposal, it will give middle schools across this city students that are high performing the opportunity, if they choose to attend a specialized environment.
Well, I appreciate your testimony, and thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to note that from what I understand, having this specialized exam or this one exam, not to say that we shouldn't look at other multiple measures, but it was genuinely sort of imposed to address the fact that there was not a fair opportunity when there was discretion at the principal level to be able to admit these students. And so there was this standardized exam, just as we have in civil service exams, in order for people of color to be able to gain a level footing with respect to admission into these schools. And so I caution the fact that when we remove this particular standard, that we may not necessarily go to a better place, but back to a position where we were in prior to the fact that there was these standardized level of exams, where the playing field is no longer leveled, and the principal have the discretion to say who they're going to allow into these schools and who they're not going to allow in these schools, as we've seen a discriminatory nature, particularly in certain cases as the middle schools such as Mark Twain. But I do appreciate your conversation, and I do look forward to continuing the dialogue with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. Please.